abyss beckons with a chilling call. Come closer, listen to the shadows draw. So subscribe and like, and don't be afraid to dive into the darkness where the shadows are laid. Tales from the shadows will spook your world. Join us on this journey, let your fears unfurl. Stay tuned, stay weird, and watch out for what lurks in the shadows.
Welcome, friends, to the dark and the deep, where whispers linger and shadows creep. Tales from the shadows, where legends arise with ghostly stories and myths that mesmerize. We ended the first story of the Denny Wyatt series last time, and today's tale starts part 3 of that series. Without further ado, here is part 2 of Denny Wyatt and the Shadows of Helheim. After narrowly escaping Niflheim, Denny Wyatt and his friends Celine and Eric return to Valhalla Prep, only to discover that their journey is far from over. Loki's influence is spreading, and his plan involves a more dangerous realm, Helheim, the land of the dead. But before they can confront Loki, Denny must first learn the true extent of his powers and face painful truths about his heritage. As shadows from Helheim invade the mortal world, Denny must make impossible choices and risk everything to stop a catastrophe threatening gods and mortals alike. Denny sat cross-legged on the floor, Gungnir resting across his knees. The spear hummed with a quiet, almost conscious energy, the runes etched into its surface, flickering faintly. Denny's fingers brushed over the runes, and memories of the cold, the haunting wails, and the monsters that lurked in the shadows flooded back, making his heart race. Across from him, Celine was working on her bow. She had dismantled it into precise pieces, spreading them on a cloth. Her movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, as she wiped each fragment clean. Her face was drawn, shadows darkening the space under her eyes. Eric, ever restless, was pacing in a circle, his shield strapped to his back and his sword clutched in one hand. He had always been the jokester to lighten the mood with a sarcastic comment or a grin, but even he had fallen silent since their return. Denny broke the tense quiet. "Do you ever feel like it's not over?" he asked, his voice sounding small in the vast hall. Celine paused, her hands stilling over her bowstring. She didn't look up, but Denny saw how her shoulders stiffened. "Because it isn't," she said softly. Eric let out a sharp exhale, stopping mid-pace. He dropped his sword with a loud clatter that echoed off the stone walls. "We just got back from one nightmare," he snapped, running a hand through his messy blonde hair. "And now we're already talking about the next one? Can't we get a moment to breathe? To feel normal?" Normal. The word felt foreign to Denny now, like a relic from a past life. "I wish we could," Denny admitted, his voice thick with longing. "But even if we wanted to, we can't ignore the fact that something is wrong. Loki is still out there, and he won't stop until—" His words trailed off, the weight of their reality pressing down on him. Celine looked up then, her gaze piercing. "Until what?" she challenged, her hands tightening around her bow. "Until he wins, until we're broken." A sudden knock on the door shattered the tension. It opened to reveal Headmistress Ingrid, her Valkyrie armor gleaming and her long, golden hair flowing over her shoulders. "Denny, Celine, Eric," she said, her voice echoing in the hall. "We have a situation. Follow me." Denny's heart sank, the fatigue he had felt just moments before replaced with a surge of dread. There was never a break, never a moment to catch their breath. He glanced at his friends, and together they rose to follow Ingrid, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them once more. Ingrid led them swiftly down the corridors of Valhalla Prep, the school's students parting to make way for the headmistress and her 3 warriors in training. The walls of the great hall loomed overhead, adorned with ancient tapestries that told the tales of heroes long gone. But Denny barely noticed the grandeur. His mind was racing, his heart thudding in his chest. They entered the grand hall, where a gathering of teachers and Valkyries had formed around a large, magical projection. The image hovered in the air, shimmering like a mirage. It showed a quaint Midgardian village nestled between snow-covered hills, the scene bathed in an eerie, ghostly mist. Shadows slithered through the fog, and spectral figures drifted aimlessly, their forms flickering like dying flames. Denny's breath caught in his throat. The ghostly forms weren't just wandering. They were reaching out, clawing at the world around them with hands that seemed to dissolve and reform. The villagers were in a panic, their terrified screams muffled by the dense mist. Helheim's influence is seeping into Midgard, Ingrid explained, her voice tight with worry. The barriers between the realms are weakening. If this continues, the dead will cross over permanently, and Midgard will become a realm of shadows. The implications were staggering. Denny felt a wave of nausea. The last thing they needed was an invasion of the dead into the mortal world. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the fear rising in his chest. "How is this happening?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Ingrid's gaze was stern, but her eyes held a glimmer of something softer, perhaps sympathy or fear. "Loki," she said. "He is exploiting his ties to Helheim to tear open the seams of reality, and it is your connection to Odin, Denny, that makes you central to this conflict." Denny's hands tightened around Gungnir. The spear thrummed with energy as if recognizing the danger. "What do we do?" he asked, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. Ingrid's expression hardened. "You will need to go to Helheim," she said, "to confront the source of this disturbance. But it won't be easy. You'll need a guide who understands the magic of death and the underworld." Denny's mouth went dry. As only one person fits that description. Hel, the goddess of Helheim and Loki's daughter. The idea of facing her was more than daunting. It was terrifying. Celine's voice was cold but controlled. "We've faced monsters before. We can do this." Eric, however, looked uneasy. "Helheim is different," he said, the usual bravado gone from his voice. "It's a place where the dead linger. What if we don't come back?" The question echoed in Denny's mind. The path ahead was dark, more dangerous than anything they had faced. But as he looked at his friends, Celine's steely determination and Eric's nervous but steady loyalty, he knew they had to try. "Then we make sure we do come back," Denny said, trying to sound confident. "Together." Ingrid nodded, though there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "Prepare yourselves," she said. "You leave at dawn." As the image of the ghostly village faded, Denny felt the cold weight of dread settles in his stomach. They had survived Niflheim, but Helheim was something else entirely. And somewhere, Loki was waiting, his web of plans and lies drawing tighter around them. Denny didn't sleep that night. He sat by his window, staring out into the star-strewn sky. The moon's light cast long shadows over Valhalla Prep's sprawling grounds, and the wind whispered through the trees, a sound that seemed almost mournful. He thought of the life he had left behind when he discovered his divine heritage, how he missed the warmth of home, the simplicity of days before gods, monsters, and impossible choices. Couldn't sleep either? Denny turned to see Eric standing in the doorway, a blanket draped over his shoulders and his hair a mess. Denny shook his head. "Too much on my mind. You?" Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that vision. The dead reaching out, pulling everything into shadow." Denny couldn't argue with that. Helheim was unlike any realm they had ventured into before, and facing a goddess like Hel was bound to change them, one way or another. "We've beaten the odds before," he said, trying to sound convincing. "We'll find a way." The dawn came too soon, and with it, the time to depart. Denny, Eric, and Celine gathered in the courtyard, their breath misting in the cold morning air. Celine was armed, her bow strapped to her back and a quiver full of enchanted arrows at her hip. Denny shouldered Gungnir, feeling the familiar weight of the spear. Headmistress Ingrid awaited them, her presence as commanding as ever. "These will serve as your guide," she said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. Denny took the bundle, feeling the magic vibrating from the stones. "Thank you," he said confidently, trying to infuse his words. Ingrid's gaze softened. "Remember," she said, "Helheim is a place of lost souls." Behind Ingrid, a portal shimmered to life, swirling with magic and shadow, the gateway to Helheim. Denny took a breath, turning to Celine and Eric. "Ready?" he asked, though he knew there was no proper way to be prepared for what awaited them. Celine lifted her chin, her eyes fierce. "We don't have a choice." Eric managed to smile, though it wavered. "Yeah, let's get this over with before I lose my nerve." Together, they stepped into the portal, the world dissolving into darkness. The sensation of traveling through the portal was nothing like the Bifrost. He gripped Gungnir tightly, focusing on the weapon's warmth, a small light in the consuming darkness. Then they landed. The three of them stumbled onto the blackened, barren ground, the air thick with an acrid metallic scent. Helheim. Denny steadied himself, looking around. The land seemed endless, a desolate expanse broken only by twisted, skeletal trees and jagged stones. Eric exhaled shakily. "This place feels wrong," he murmured, his voice sounding small. Celine's face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. "Focus. We must find Hel and stop this before the shadows reach Midgard." Denny nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay strong," he told himself, clutching Gungnir. They had made it this far. They couldn't turn back now. The bleak expanse of Helheim stretched endlessly before them, a land where hope had withered and died long ago. Every breath they took seemed to sap warmth from their bodies, leaving a chill that seeped into their bones. As Denny, Celine, and Eric made their way forward, the landscape shifted subtly, twisting and folding. The ground beneath their feet cracked with each step, releasing puffs of grey mist that coiled around their ankles. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and now and then a low, mournful wail echoed through the mist. Eric broke the silence first, his voice calm and strained. "Do you think it's true? What Ingrid said about the dead here being bound by regrets?" Celine glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wary. "It makes sense. This realm isn't just a place. It reflects all the pain and loss people carry, even after death." Denny clenched his jaw, trying to focus on the path ahead. Every step felt heavier, as if something unseen were dragging him back. He could feel Helheim working on him, whispering doubts and fears into his mind. Was he strong enough for this? They came to a steep ravine, the ground suddenly splitting apart to reveal a jagged chasm that seemed to descend into endless darkness. Shadows danced along the edges, whispering and shifting. Denny peered over the side, but the bottom was lost to shadow. "How do we cross?" Eric asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Denny's eyes narrowed as he scanned the terrain. Across the gap, a narrow, crumbling stone bridge stretched from one side to the other. "That," Celine said, pointing to the bridge, though her face was filled with doubt. "But we'll have to be careful. One wrong step." Denny took a deep breath and gripped Gungnir tighter, feeling the weapon's magic pulsing in response. "I'll go first," Denny volunteered, stepping forward. He forced himself to ignore the way the shadows reached for him. With slow, measured movements, he placed one foot in front of the other, the stones groaning under his weight. Each step felt like a lifetime, but he refused to look down. His heart hammered in his chest, his senses hyper-aware. When he finally reached the other side, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and turned to signal his friends. "Your turn, Celine," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. Celine made her way across, her movements graceful yet cautious. She was halfway over the bridge when a gust of cold wind swept through. "Keep going," Denny urged, panic spiking in his chest. Celine swallowed hard and forced herself to move, one careful step at a time. When she reached Denny, he helped her off the bridge. "Your turn, Eric," Celine called. Eric hesitated, looking at the narrow bridge with wide eyes. His usual humor had vanished, replaced by genuine fear. He tentatively stepped onto the stones, his shield clanking softly against his back. The bridge groaned under his weight. But Eric pressed on, his face set in grim determination. Denny and Celine watched anxiously, their muscles tensed. As Eric neared the middle of the bridge, the mist thickened, swirling around him, and shadowy figures began to emerge from the darkness. Denny's breath caught in his throat. The shapes were ghostly, human-like but twisted, their features distorted by sorrow and rage. "Eric, hurry!" Denny shouted, his voice cutting through the mist. Eric broke into a run, the bridge shaking with every step. One of the ghostly figures lunged at him, and Eric swung his shield. Denny felt a surge of fear and raised Gungnir. The spear responded with a burst of golden light, illuminating the shadows. Eric took the opportunity to sprint the last few steps, throwing himself onto solid ground beside Denny and Celine. "That was too close," Eric gasped, his voice trembling. Denny helped him up, his own heart still racing. "We need to keep moving," he said, though his mind reeled from the encounter. They continued, the air growing colder with each step. The land grew more twisted, the ground littered with broken bones. Then, in the distance, they saw a towering iron gate half buried in mist. The gate was covered in intricate carvings. Celine gripped her bow, her eyes narrowing. "We're getting close," she said, her voice firm. Denny looked at his friends, his pulse thundering in his ears. They had come so far and faced so much, yet the real challenge lay ahead. The iron gate loomed over Denny and his friends like a monolithic monument to despair. The mist around it was thick and cold, muffling even the faintest sounds. The two skeletal wolves that stood guard were enormous, their rib cages showing beneath rotting fur, and their jaws lined with jagged, glistening fangs. They did not move, but their glowing eyes tracked the trio's every step, burning with cold, evil intelligence. Denny felt a chill that went beyond the bitter cold of Helheim. The presence of the wolves was suffocating, their aura radiating an ancient, supernatural power. He gripped Gung tighter, the spear pulsing with magic that warmed his hand just enough to keep his courage from failing. Celine's fingers twitched near her bow, though she had not yet drawn an arrow. Her eyes were narrowed, calculating. "Any ideas?" she whispered, her breath misting in the frozen air. Eric's shield clinked softly against his side as he shifted uneasily. "We're not going to reason with them, are we?" he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Denny studied the wolves, his mind racing. The gate they guarded was the only visible entrance to the heart of Helheim, and he knew they couldn't afford to fight here if it meant drawing Hell's attention too soon. But the wolves didn't look like they would step aside if asked. As if sensing his hesitation, one of the wolves let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the ground itself. Denny forced himself to stand tall, meeting the creature's gaze. He had faced monsters and gods before, but these wolves felt different, primal and connected to Helheim itself. He swallowed hard and spoke, his voice strong despite his fear. "We seek an audience with Hel," he declared. "Our business here is urgent, and we mean no disrespect to her domain." The wolves exchanged glances, and the mist around them swelled faster. The second wolf stepped forward, jaws opening to reveal rows of gleaming, sharp teeth. When it spoke, its voice was like scraping bone against stone. "Why should we allow trespassers to disturb the Lady of Helheim?" Denny braced himself, trying to project confidence. "We come to bargain," he said, hoping the truth of their mission would buy them time. "A threat looms over the 9 realms even Hel cannot ignore." The wolves tilted their heads in eerie unison. The first wolf's eyes flared, taking a step closer, bringing its skeletal frame within striking distance of Denny. All who enter Helheim seek to bargain. All make promises they cannot keep. The wolf's voice was laced with skepticism and barely contained rage. Celine stepped forward, her voice as sharp as her arrows. "We're not here to lie or waste anyone's time. If we fail, Hel's domain could be consumed by the same shadows, threatening the rest of the realms." The second wolf sniffed the air as if trying to detect deception. Its gaze lingered on Eric, who stood frozen, his shield clutched to his chest. "This one is weak," the wolf said, its tone mocking. "Fear eats at his heart." Eric flinched, but he squared his shoulders and took a shaky step forward. "Maybe I am afraid," he said, his voice cracking, "but that doesn't mean I'll run. You're welcome to try if you want to see what I'm made of." Denny's heart sank as the wolves bared their teeth, the challenge hanging like a drawn blade. Fighting them seemed inevitable, but he needed to think of a way to turn the odds in their favor. Gungnir hummed in his hand, and a sudden idea came to him. His father, Odin, had taught him the value of wisdom and cunning over brute force. What if they didn't need to fight the wolves at all? He lowered Gungnir and spoke, his voice even. "What if we offered a test instead?" The wolf's eyes narrowed, intrigued but wary. "You can test our worthiness however you see fit. If we fail, we'll leave Helheim, or become part of it. If we succeed, you let us pass." The first wolf tilted its head, considering. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the second wolf let out a chilling laugh. "A test of worthiness," it mused. "Very well, we accept." The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the shadows around them began to twist and take shape. The wolves stepped back, their skeletal forms melding into the darkness as the test they had conjured came to life. 3 shadowy figures emerged from the mist, each taking on a form that made Denny's blood run cold. They were copies of Denny, Celine, and Eric, but twisted and corrupted, their faces twisted in grim masks of malice. You face your weaknesses made flesh, the first wolf declared. Defeat them, and you may pass. Fail, and you shall remain here, shadows among shadows. Denny raised Gungnir, his pulse racing. The shadow version of himself grinned, its eyes glowing sinisterly. He could feel the pressure of the realm pressing down on him, the physical but also mental and emotional challenge. Stay strong, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to his friends or himself. As the shadowy doubles closed in, Denny knew this would be their most brutal battle yet. This tale continues next time on Tales from the Shadows, so be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Until next time, stay tuned, stay weird, and watch out for what lurks in the shadows.
This has been Tales from the Shadows, where the shadows speak the stories that will make you weak. Join us on this journey into the unknown. Tales from the shadows, where fear is shown. So subscribe and like, and don't be afraid to dive into the darkness where the shadows are laid.